Hello everyone. Zul'jin has become a hero within Heroes of the Storm, so I figured it could be fun to talk about his storyline, but to understand it properly, we'll first have to dive into the history of the trolls, specifically that of the Amani trolls. This story begins after the Titans finished up bringing order to the planet of Azeroth, and for generation after generation, life bloomed across the world. Especially the area around the Well of Eternity, it saw a lot of action as the arcane lifeblood from the Titan spirit inside the planet, it sped up the cycles of growth and rebirth. Soon enough, sentient beings evolved from the land's primitive life forms. Amongst the first were the trolls, a race of savage hunter-gatherers who flourished in Azeroth's jungles and forests. Though they had only average intelligence, they did possess incredible agility and strength. Their unique physiology, it allowed them to recover from physical injuries at an astonishing rate, and they could even regenerate lost limbs over time. Now the Chronicles, it just gives the credit for this as it's part of how their bodies work, while other sources that used to claim it was actually the Loa or the Wild Gods, that they were the ones who sometimes gave the trolls the power to regenerate. Either way, the trolls developed some superstitious customs, some practiced cannibalism and devoted themselves to war. A rare few amongst the trolls, they actually searched for knowledge through mystic practices and meditation. Others worked on strengthening their ties to a dark and powerful form of magic known as voodoo.
Stay away from the voodoo.
But no matter their individual customs, all trolls shared a common religion that revolved around Kalimdor's wild gods, or as the trolls called them, the Loa. They worshipped them, and because of that, the trolls gathered near a series of peaks and plateaus in southern Kalimdor. This was home to many of the honored Loa. The trolls named the holy mountain range Zandalar and built small encampments upon its slopes. The most powerful group of trolls that formed, they were called the Zandalar tribe, and they claimed nearly all of these Zandalar's tallest plateaus, believing them to be sacred grounds. Atop the highest peaks, they created a small cluster of crude shrines. With time, these grew into a temple city known as Zuldazar. But those in power don't go unchallenged, and over the next several centuries, other tribes rose up to try and claim the Zandalari territory and power. Most notable of these tribes were the fearsome Gurubashi, the Amani, and the Drakari. The Gurubashi and Amani in particular, they laid claim to enormous patches of land in Kalimdor's lush jungles and woods. Sometimes, tribes would clash with each other, often over hunting grounds, yet major conflicts, they didn't really happen very often, and rarely did they last very long. Trolls were such skilled and fierce fighters that any real conflict between them, it would cost both sides dearly. There was plenty of untouched land to go around, and the different tribes, they quickly learned that it was wiser to resettle than to risk war. Only one place was forbidden to all by the tribe's witch doctors and priests, a small mount of blackened stone located at the base of the Zandalar Mountains. For many years, the trolls listened to the warning, none dared to disobey, but over time, curiosity won out. A group of rebellious trolls traveled to this forbidden mount, and they discovered that the black stones, they were actually the rough and sharp hide of a monstrous creature. They believed that this was some sort of undiscovered Loa, and a powerful one at that, considering that all the other spirits, they were frightened of this being. Foolishly, they performed vile rituals and living sacrifices to awaken the slumbering monstrosity. Unknown to the trolls was that this being was actually one of the two Kafraxi generals that were sent out centuries ago by Loken to take out Keeper Tyr. In that confrontation, Tyr called upon all of his power and he blew up one of them, but this Kafrax called Kefix was able to escape that area and make his way to what would be known as the Zandalar Mountains. His injuries were severe though, and the dark creature fell into a deep hibernation, and now the trolls, they were doing all that they could to wake the creature up. They succeeded, and the Kafrax looked upon the troll civilization with nothing but contempt. For it was but a pale shadow of what the Black Empire, the empire of the old gods ruling the world of Azeroth before the Titans showed up, it was but a pale shadow of what that once was. Kefix knew it would delight the old gods to see this puny civilization rent to ashes, and he found a race of creatures to aid him with this task, the Akir, which it could control. The swarms were rallied, driving them to make war and establish their dominance over Azeroth once again. As Kefix took its time to expand its power and recover, the Akir began building a vast subterranean empire known as Ash-Akir. He patiently watched and waited as the Akiri ranks rose in number. When the time was right, the Kafrax led the insectoids from the underground empire, and they swept across the lands. The Akiri were like nothing the trolls had ever faced, and smaller tribes quickly fell before the legion of unrelenting insectoids. As the Akir came closer and closer to the Zandalar Mountains, the Zandalari moved to act. They decided to unite the different troll tribes into one single mighty force, which they called the Empire of Zul. They will put aside the differences and work together to face and destroy the Akir. It was the Zandalari who took on the role of commanding the troll armies. With their guidance, the other trolls used ambush tactics in the surrounding jungles to chop down the enemy's numbers. At another location, priests worked on summoning the Loa to assault their enemies. These ferocious wild gods, they joined the troll warriors in battle, ripping through the Akiri ranks and even wounding Kefix. They were forced to retreat before they could ever mount a proper siege on the sacred mountains. Kefix was now gravely wounded by the Loa, and he fled to the northeast with some of its closest Akiri followers. There it planned to regain more of its strength, while the insectoids, they continued their war against the trolls. Though they were successful in driving the Akiri away, the Zandalari knew full well that their enemies still posed a grave threat. They could not allow them to be left unchecked, for with time, they'd simply attack their outlying troll territories and maybe try another assault. That is why they decided to send the tribes out to hunt down the Akir and end their threat once and for all. No corner of the continent could be left unguarded, so the Zandalari convinced the most power-hungry troll factions to establish new strongholds across the world. Chief among these groups were once again the Amani, Gurubashi and the Drakari. After they defeated the Akir, they could claim the fertile new lands for themselves without any competition from any of the other tribes. So it was that the Drakari, they pushed into the frigid north near Urwar. The Gurubashi decided to go southwest near Ankiraj, while the Amani, they set out to destroy none other than Kefix. They tracked its trail far to the northeastern woodlands, cutting through an unending mass of Akiri guardians. In a final savage battle, the entire tribe threw itself in a suicidal attack against Kefix and his remaining insectoid minions. In the end, only a tiny fraction of the troll army survived, but they were successful in bringing down the Kefrax. The victory came at a high cost, but the fearsome reputation of the Amani, it became legend amongst each and every tribe. On the spot where they had killed Kefix, the trolls then built their new settlement. It will one day grow into a massive sprawling temple city known as Zulaman. With their leader, with the Kefrax gone, the rest of the Akir, they no longer fought with as much ferocity or purpose. After many centuries of brutal battle between trolls and insectoids, the trolls managed to shatter the Akir Empire. The remaining insectoids, they were contained to the far northern and southern reaches of the continent. Those that survived fortified their underground colonies against further troll attacks. They showed no more interest in fighting, and in time, the trolls proclaimed themselves victorious. Now, as will one day happen with the Alliance as well, the lack of war to bind them all together, it caused the troll faction to grow ever more distant from each other. The widely spread strongholds of the different tribes, they grew into vibrant homes, temple cities, and eventually empires in their own rights. The Zandalari, they decided to withdraw to their mountain plateaus to pursue spiritual knowledge, but they would always maintain an immense influence over all the other troll societies. So that's how the trolls fought with Kefix and the Akir, and how they established different tribes and empires in the world. But of course, time didn't stand still, and a group of dark trolls, they found a way to the Well of Eternity. They eventually evolved into a race known as the Night Elves, led by the Queen Azshara. In her eyes, the trolls were nothing but a minor nuisance, their battle lust a symptom of primitive and unenlightened minds. She eventually struck an accord with the Zandalar tribe, in exchange for ending troll incursions into Night Elf territory. The Zandalari, they would be allowed, by Azshara's grace, to keep the sacred Zandalar mountain south of the Well of Eternity. The trolls were forced to agree, fully aware that there stood no chance against the Night Elves' arcane powers. This shameful agreement, it fostered the trolls' deep resentment towards the Night Elves, a bitter hatred that would carry on for generations to come. Now, as most of you know, Azshara and the Highborn, they made contact with Sargeras and the Legion. They worked on bringing them into the world of Azeroth, using the Well of Eternity as their source of power for the portal. Eventually, other Night Elves found out about their plans, a resistance was formed, and the War of the Ancients played out. Even some of the Highborn knew what their queen was doing was not the right thing. Led by Duffamar Sunstrider, they abandoned the palace, and they too joined the resistance. In the end, the war was won, the Legion was sent back to the realm from which they came, but all of this made the well incredibly unstable, and the sundering of the land took place. Kalimdor was split apart, with the Maelstrom as an eternal reminder of what had happened. Despite that, the world was saved from the Legion, and the Night Elves decided that using arcane magic, that which made all of this happen to begin with, that was not a good plan. Despite Illidan Stormrage using vials filled with water from the original Well of Eternity to make a brand new one, they still decided to make the use of arcane magic punishable by death. The Highborn that had joined them, they simply couldn't stop though. They saw arcane magic as their birthright, and since there were so many of them, the rest of the people decided to not massively execute them all. Instead, they were banished. Dafremar led his people to a land that would later be known as the Eastern Kingdoms. They stayed in Tirisfal Glade for a while until they moved to a better land in the north. Following the trails of magical essence, their journey took them into the lands that the Amani trolls called home. As you might imagine, their arrival, it infuriated the trolls, who still harbored a bitter hatred of the elves from the days of Queen Azshara. The Amani wasted no time in sending out raiding parties, and the Highborn soon learned to fear the troll ambushes in the dense forests. Still, the elves stubbornly pressed forward, using their magical powers to decimate any Amani who dared to cross their path. Soon enough, it was the trolls who learned to fear their power, to be cautious in their attacks. The constant skirmishes, it built a mutual feeling of hatred between the Amani and the Highborn. Now, despite the trolls' ferocity, the elves did finally reach a spot where the magic was just right. Dafremar told them that this was where they would build a new civilization. He too had gotten his hands on a vial with enchanted waters from the Well of Eternity, and he used it to create a well of their own, a well that they called the Sunwell. Moving away from their traditional worship of the moon, the Highborn now took their strength from the sun. In time, they'd even go from night elves to being high elves, and they called their new land Quel'Thalas, also known as High Home. The trolls, however, they were not too happy with the new neighbors, as the High Elves had built a new kingdom atop ancient Amani ruins. Ruins that the trolls still considered to be holy grounds. They outnumbered the High Elves by more than 10 to 1, and they did everything that they could to drive these invaders from their sacred lands. The High Elves in turn, they drew on the full might of their brand new well, barely holding off the trolls' assaults. Dafremar himself, he led every battle against the fierce Amani. Felomorn in hand, they carved out the borders of their kingdom. Their new home was paid for in the blood of the brothers and sisters, yet the High Elves had not forgotten what the abuse of arcane magic had done. To prevent another catastrophe, they worked on hiding their spellwork from the Legion. Over several decades, a series of runestones, they were built around the borders of Quel'Thalas. They called this Ban Diniorel, or commonly known as the Gatekeeper. Not only would it hide their use of arcane magic, it would also frighten away the superstitious Amani. With the use of their magic, the High Elves were eventually able to force the trolls to retreat all the way back to their temple city of Zulaman. The trolls decided that it was safer to ambush elven convoys that moved too far beyond the magical barrier than to launch a full-scale assault on Quel'Thalas. To counter this threat, an elite group of High Elf Rangers soon rose up to keep the convoys safe, and with a brand new empire established, Dafremar stepped down as their leader. His bloodline would go on to inherit a kingdom of peace and prosperity, but peace often doesn't last long in the world of Warcraft. His great-grandson and Astarion Sunstrider, he put on the mantle of leadership in a time where their people faced war with the trolls once again. Some new neighbors flourished in the Eastern Kingdoms as well, a race known as the Humans, descendants from the Vrykul that had taken their malformed children to the area. Back then, they still lived in separate tribes, warring with one another for land and power, very similar to how trolls used to live. Only one tribe, the Arafi, led by warlord Furadin, they realized that what they were doing was not the way to go. Troll incursions into their territories, they become more pronounced and ruthless. Something was changing amongst the brutish Amani to the north, and the Arafi knew that if humankind did not unite, they would stand little chance against a true war with its moss-skinned foes. They worked hard on bringing their rivals under one single banner, be it by force or diplomacy. Eventually, King Furadin named his new kingdom Arafor and tasked his most gifted builders with constructing a mighty capital called Strom. The area around this new city, it was a perfect buffer zone between the humanity and the Amani, preventing the trolls from launching their much feared forced ambushes. He also ordered his people to build a massive wall near the capital to keep the Amani out. Word of Sun's might, it quickly spread amongst the human tribes that had not yet joined them, and they all quickly moved to the fortress for safety in numbers. Just as Furadin had expected, the Amani trolls soon began moving in on their outlying lands. Two generals were sent out to gather intelligence on their enemies and stop any of the brutes who moved too deep into Arafor's borders. One of them was called Igneous, who went well beyond their borders, slaughtering any trolls that they found skulking in the woodlands. He would earn himself the name Trollbane for the huge amount of Amani blood that he spilled. The second general was called Lordain, who patrolled the edges of the northern borders, putting any of the Amani that dared to enter their kingdom to the blade. Both of them returned to Strom with stories of a horrific conflict brewing between the Amani and the High Elves. There were also whispers of something else stirring in the Dark Forest, tales of strange voodoo rituals and supernatural beings prowling the wilds in the dead of night. Disturbing reports, but still Thoradin and his generals, they agreed that they would not risk their own kind or send any aid to reclusive elves. For the time being, they kept their forces behind their massive ramparts, confident that they could withstand any kind of foe. So it was that the trolls within Zulaman, they were planning their revenge upon the High Elves. Fierce warriors they might be, they lacked a strong leader who could bring them the victory that they so desperately needed. They even started to fight amongst themselves, threatening to destroy their tribe from within, but thankfully they did receive aid from the Zandalar tribe. The Zandalari, powerful and respected, they saw themselves as the protectors and spiritual leaders of all the other trolls. They were eager to strengthen their societies across Azeroth, since time had not been kind to them since the Great Sundering. Even the Zandalari themselves had suffered. Their once glorious mountains of Zandalar, they were swallowed by the sea, reduced to nothing more than a small island. It was in the Amani that the Zandalari saw an opportunity to revitalize one of their most powerful tribes and reassert troll dominance within the Eastern Kingdoms. Taking out the High Elves, it would not be an easy task, but the Zandalari were confident that they could claim victory. After all, Quel'Thalas was not as powerful as that ancient Night Elf empire that had decimated the trolls so long ago. On top of that, over the millennia, they had also honed and perfected their own voodoo arts, power which they were more than ready to unleash upon the elves. A handful of wise Zandalari emissaries, they made the trip from their island home to Zulaman, and there they promised to help the Amani plan for war. More importantly, they also pledged that the mighty Loa demigods, they would aid trolls in the battle to come. And to settle the question as to who would be leading all of them, the Zandalari selected Jinta, one of the Amani's most fearless warriors, to take the job. Soon enough, small Amani warbands emerged from the forest and attacked Quel'Thalas' borders, testing out the High Elf strength, always keeping their true numbers and capabilities hidden. After a couple of successful skirmishes, the Amani decided that it was time for their all-out war. Without warning, tens of thousands of troll fighters, they exploded from the shadowy forests. Monstrous lower demigods marched alongside the Amani, infusing their troll adherents with supernatural might. The High Elves did all they could to hold back their foes, but they had no other choice but to give ground. With astonishing speed and ferocity, the Amani laid waste to the outer reaches of Quel'Thalas. From Zulaman, the Zandalari emissaries watched the unfolding war with great pleasure. Even the elves and their potent arcane powers could not withstand the might of the Amani, the might of the entire troll race. Their ultimate victory was only a matter of time, but the elves were not going to go out without a fight. They sent ambassadors to Strom to talk with Thoradin and his people. The king had kept an eye on the war between the High Elves and the Trolls, and the scouts had reported that the Trolls were winning the war. Still, they held on to the belief that stepping into the conflict, it would only put their people at unnecessary risk. But the words of the ambassador, it quickly changed their minds. The Amani threat was far greater than Thoradin or his advisors could have possibly imagined. Without assistance from Arathor, the Trolls would soon enough destroy Quel'Thalas, and after that launch their full might against Strom itself. Thoradin and his advisors, they discussed the situation and figured that if they were taught the ways of magic, it might give them the edge that they needed to truly make an impact in the war. Their offer to the elves was in exchange for the military aid. The High Elves would teach the humans magic. Now knowing that they had little choice, they agreed to tutor 100 of their people. And so they did. Arathor began his offensive against the trolls. Over 20,000 human soldiers, they gathered at Alterac Fortress. From there, it was Thoradin himself who led his forces towards Quel'Thalas. Wisely, they kept the human spellcasters behind the walls of Alterac, for if things played out as Thoradin hoped, they would have the role to play. After weeks of hard marching, the full might of Arathor's army smashed into the southern flank of the Amani. In coordination with the Arathi, the High Elves then launched a counterattack from the north, and they laid waste to the Trolls' front lines. Now the Amani had to fight on two fronts, yet Jinta, he still remained confident that they would emerge victorious. The Elves' decision to ally themselves with these primitive humans, it simply reeked of desperation. They were but a minor nuisance, one that Jinta and his fierce warriors would quickly eradicate. Intent on destroying Arathor's armies, they turned their warband south, and once they were destroyed, Jinta figured that they could just refocus on Quel'Thalas and exterminate the elves for good. But this was exactly what Thoradin had hoped for. He ordered them to slowly retreat back towards Alterac. Weeks of brutal and bloody fighting followed as the overconfident Amani, they chased them all the way to the mountains. As the humans moved south, the High Elves moved from Quel'Thalas and they marched to Alterac as well. They constantly assaulted the northern flank of the Amani, slowly chopping down the trolls' rear guards. What Thoradin had not expected was the speed by which the Amani gained on the humans. They were threatening to overwhelm them, but General Lordain, he volunteered to stop the trolls, knowing full well that he would never survive this mission. He and 500 of their bravest warriors, they held off the Amani host in a narrow valley, where their numbers meant little. The rest of the Arathi army, they continued moving south, and the ultimate price paid by Lordain and his warriors, it allowed Thoradin's plan to succeed. They finally reached Alterac Fortress, with the Amani hot in pursuit. One morning, as a thick fog enveloped the Alterac foothills, the Amani fell upon the human army. Although greatly outnumbered, the Arathi fought back with unexpected tenacity. Days went by, with neither side giving ground. Soon enough, the High Elves came in from the north, and they attacked the Amani on a second front. When the humans and elves were confident that they had worn down the Amani ranks, they decided that the time had come to unleash the secret weapon. Together with the elven sorcerers, the human magi kept hidden with the fortress. They called upon their vast newfound powers. Instead of simply attacking one by one, they all pooled their power and wove a single terrible spell. The mountains heaved and trembled, and torrent of fire lashed down from the blood-red sky. The energies engulfed the Amani ranks. The sorcerer's flame burned Loa and Troll alike from the inside out. One of the first to be consumed by these enchanted flames, that was the leader Jinta. Without him, the surviving trolls quickly broke their ranks and they retreated north. The elves and humans, of course, gave chase. They hunted them down like game, slaughtering every Amani combatant that they could find. The Zandalari emissaries, they could not believe what had happened. Once so confident of their victory, they now scaled back to their island home in disbelief and shame. For them, and many of the other trolls, this defeat marked a dark turning point in their history, one from which their race never truly recovered. The glory days in which the trolls ruled the world, that had come to an end, but for Quel'Thalas and Arator, the victory in the war was the beginning of a glorious new era. For months, they celebrated their victory, and the elves pledged their undying loyalty to Arator and to Thoradin's descendants. A pledge that would play a role by the time that the Horde found its way to Azeroth and teamed up with Zul'jin and the remaining Amani. However, that's the story we're going to save for next week. So for now, thank you very much for watching, everyone. Again, hope my voice was alright. I'm dealing with a cold right now, and of course the health issues. But what can you do? Either way, subscribe if you like my videos, leave a like if you enjoyed this one, and until next time, guys. See ya!